For thousands of years, humans have tried to understand what life really is, and more importantly, to understand themselves. Why are we conscious? Where does our sense of self come from? And what happens after we die? In searching for answers, nearly every civilization arrived at the idea of the soul, some kind of invisible, non-material essence that supposedly carries our personality, memory, and consciousness. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. In ancient times, people didn't have the scientific tools to explain what was happening inside the human body. Sleep, for example, looked like a temporary shutdown of reality. Death looked like something invisible, but essential, had simply vanished. So it seemed logical to assume that there must be some kind of life force inside the body that could leave it. In ancient Egyptian religion, one of the most complex systems of belief about the soul emerged. Egyptians believed a person was made up of multiple spiritual components, like the Ka, life force, and the Ba, individual personality. After death, these parts were thought to continue existing. That's why they preserved bodies through mummification and placed food, objects, and even jewelry in tombs, everything needed for the afterlife. Similar ideas appear across cultures. In ancient philosophy, Plato described the soul as an immortal entity temporarily trapped in the body. Later religions, like Christianity and Islam, also treat the soul as something eternal, destined for heaven or hell after death. In Hinduism, the soul is seen as part of a universal consciousness, moving through an endless cycle of rebirth known as samsara. But as science developed, our understanding of the human being began to change, especially with advances in brain research. Gradually, it became clear that many processes once considered spiritual actually have a physical basis. Modern neuroscience sees the brain as an incredibly complex system made up of about 86 billion neurons. These cells form vast networks that process information, create memories, generate emotions, and even produce our sense of self. Take the hippocampus, for example. It plays a crucial role in forming new memories. If it's damaged, a person can lose the ability to create new memories, something well documented in medicine. An even more striking example is Alzheimer's disease. As neurons gradually break down, people begin to lose their memory, their ability to recognize loved ones, and eventually, their sense of identity. If memory and the self existed independently in some kind of soul, it would be very difficult to explain these changes. There are other examples too. Damage to the frontal lobes can drastically change a person's personality. A calm, kind individual may become aggressive and impulsive. This suggests that personality isn't a fixed essence, but a product of specific brain structures. Religion, on the other hand, teaches that there is some kind of soul beyond the physical world, something that survives, travels, or even reincarnates while retaining memory. But while such ideas may have once fit into humanity's worldview, today it's clear that consciousness and memory are functions of the brain, shaped over millions of years by evolution, not created by any higher power. Instead, let's look at modern cognitive science. Some researchers argue that our sense of self is actually an illusion created by the brain. One famous example comes from split brain studies, where the connection between the brain's hemispheres is severed. In these cases, each hemisphere can act independently, almost like two separate centers of consciousness. Yet the brain still tries to create a single, unified story, often making up explanations for its own actions. This suggests that the self isn't something stable or unified. It's more like an ongoing process that the brain constantly constructs. There are also body illusion experiments, where a person can be made to feel that a rubber hand is their own. This shows that even our basic sense of physical identity depends on brain activity. According to some religious beliefs, all living beings have a soul, meaning the soul itself is what makes something alive, while the body is just matter without consciousness. But simple organisms raise interesting questions about this idea. Take the planarian, a flatworm with remarkable regenerative abilities. If you cut a planarian into several pieces, each piece can grow into a complete new organism. Biology explains this through stem cells and a relatively simple nervous system. But if every living being has a single unified soul, what happens to the planarian's soul when it's split? Does the soul divide? Do new souls suddenly appear? And how would the soul decide which fragment to stay in? When you really think about it, these questions reveal how problematic the concept becomes. And what about conjoined twins, like the Hensel sisters, who share one body? Do they have one soul or two? From a scientific perspective, these questions don't even arise, because there's no need to introduce the concept of a soul to explain these phenomena. Everything can be understood through biology, cells, and neural networks. It's also important to remember that consciousness didn't appear suddenly by some divine act. It is the result of hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Simple organisms have only basic responses to stimuli. More complex animals develop nervous systems, then brains. In mammals, we see advanced structures responsible for emotion and learning. The human brain is the result of this gradual complexity. Our consciousness, abstract thinking, language, and self-reflection didn't appear overnight. They emerged step by step through evolution. This challenges the idea that consciousness exists separately from the body. If anything, the opposite seems true. Consciousness is deeply tied to the brain and its development. The concept of the soul appears to be an early attempt to explain complex processes without sufficient knowledge or tools. As science advanced, many functions once attributed to the soul received biological explanations. Today, we know that memory, emotions, and personality depend on the brain. We understand that consciousness evolved over time, and we can see how changes in the brain directly affect who we are. And maybe realizing that there is no invisible spark inside us isn't something to fear, but something to understand. If our self isn't an immortal gift, but instead a fragile and incredibly complex dance of billions of neurons, then every moment of consciousness becomes truly precious. We are not just passengers in a body. We are this extraordinary symphony of matter that learned how to feel, to love, and to question itself. And when the old illusion of the soul fades away, what remains is not emptiness, but the astonishing reality of what we truly are. So, which illusion will fall next? See you in the next video.